Thank you for being here. I'm John, one of the co-owners here with Kelly of the gallery. We've got Kelly's over there, and Roy and Dean. And we're very excited to have with us tonight Colin Page to talk about his painting practice and his current show. There you go. Song of Summer. So first off, let me just say a couple words about the format because, as you may know, we live stream all of our talks. And so if you're watching it on the live stream, if you want to ask Colin any questions, just go ahead and type it into the comments section, and we will read them here later when he's taking questions.
I didn't know about that. Is that new?
Yes.
All right.
Since the pandemic, we just kept doing it. For a while, we did it without anyone here, and then we just kept doing it. So anyway, and then for everyone here too, just so, also just let me say, there is a little bit of delay between us and the gallery and the live stream, so don't wait till the very end to type in a question because we might not see it in time. And then for everyone here too, just so you know, we obviously, as you can see, record all of the talks and we post all the talks on our YouTube page. So if you ever just go to YouTube and put in Greenhut Galleries, all of the artist talks will be on there. So if you ever miss one, it's free to see it. So I'm sure everyone here knows, or virtually everyone here knows Colin, and he truly needs no introduction, so I will keep it brief. Colin was raised in Baltimore and attended the Rhode Island School of Design. He graduated from Cooper Union, New York, with a concentrating in painting. He then, for a few years, lived in New York City before moving to Maine because of its diverse and captivating landscape, as you can see in the show. Colin paints the Maine coast and plein air, focusing on capturing the atmosphere and light of a scene. And I suspect it is safe to say, especially with this crowd, that Colin is one of the leading and best-known contemporary plein air painters in the state. Some of you may have taken one of Colin's wonderful workshops, and he also regularly participates in charitable events such as our local annual Cape Elizabeth Land Trust Paint for Preservation, and I think most recently the Camden Library's Camden on Canvas.
Yes.
And with that, I will, and that was just
It was Sunday, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
I'm still coming down.
Turn things over to Colin now that he's on a downward.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. This is a really fun room to talk to because it's not that big, so this tiny crowd looks huge. It feels like we're packed in. And also, thanks, the Greenhut Gallery has been really great to show with. So Dean and Roy and Kelly and John are really great to work with, and I want to just thank them for everything they do for me. So I figured I'd just tell you a little bit about myself first, for those of you who don't know much about me. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and when I started, I always drew, but when I sort of realized that I wanted to make art a bigger part of my life and figure out what that kind of meant as a career, I found out there was a high school for the arts downtown, so I transferred from the school I was going to the Baltimore High School for the Arts, where we had half the day was academic and half the day was art classes, where we had like live figure drawing, figure painting. It was basically like a college foundation course spread out over high school, and it was really wonderful. So then from there I went to Rhode Island School of Design for 2 years and transferred to Cooper Union, where I graduated with a degree in painting, which was in Manhattan. And Maine was basically, after a couple years of living in New York and working like museum jobs and as a photographer's assistant and making pizzas and anything I could do to scrape by while sharing an apartment about the size of this room with 3 other guys. I heard about all the space up here in Maine. So I came up here really just kind of on a whim for a short escape from New York and figured I'd figure out where to go from here. And that was in 2002, and I loved everything about it. I moved here in November, so I didn't even know how nice a Maine summer was. I thought the landscape was beautiful, and everyone I met here was doing something creative, interesting. There were people doing woodworking, building boats, knitting, making quilts, like everything. Everyone I met was doing something with their hands, and it was really refreshing to be around so much of that creative energy. So that's my backstory. This show, as I've been painting here, so having lived here for 20 years now, when I first got here, I'd never painted a boat in my life, painted or drawn a boat. I was a little intimidated by them. They were, especially when the sailors, lobstermen were a little more forgiving. They're still a little picky about how you depict their boat. Sailors get mad if one piece of rigging is in the wrong spot. So I ended up working pretty hard when I got here, learning how to paint the boats, and just being in Camden, there's so much height from we are where the mountains meet the sea. So we've got the Camden Hill State Park right against the ocean, and it was so amazing to go up these hills and see these beautiful views out over the islands, and then finding places like Spruce Head where there's these, going down the peninsulas around here where you find this beautiful natural landscape where it's a little quieter, you get away from the Camden and Portland crowds. So I've been painting all these scenes for so long, and it's kind of an interesting challenge trying to figure out how to move forward as a painter and painting this same landscape and how to sort of make it richer and more interesting. So I'm like holding these notes as though I'm looking at them. I'm just going to put them in my pocket and I'll get them out if I need them. So I've been thinking about like when I was in college, and everyone I knew was painting. We were painting all day and all night, and I would go to like the Metropolitan Museum or a gallery show and see something like a Rembrandt self-portrait or a Monet painting or something. And there was just something. And actually, I remember even going to the Louvre when I was, I think, 21 or 22, and walking. There's a room that goes on. It feels like it's a mile-long room of Renaissance paintings. And once in a while, one is just like, it just jumps off the wall after seeing what seems like hundreds of Renaissance paintings. One jumps off the wall. And you go up to see, like, why is that one so special? And it's a Raphael. And then you walk down, and it's like, oh, that's a Leonardo. Like every time there's something that like can kind of take a painting to this like next level. And I remember trying to figure out why it is that those paintings meant a little more. I think I have no idea really. I'm still trying to figure that out. But it seemed like the artists who were trying to do more than just like tell the straight story and like do a straight depiction of a scene, but like Rembrandt was really trying to, it seems like he's trying to paint kind of the air around the head and like the fullness of a head. So it's like basically trying to paint something that's impossible to paint. And so I've been trying to figure out how to do some of that in my own work so that when I go out and I paint a lobster boat, like, hey, another lobster boat. But it's not just the same lobster boat I would have painted 5, 10, 15 years ago, but something that's like a whole new experience of seeing a lobster boat, and how I can like either I try to find something that's like an elusive thing to capture in paint, where you've got paint's just pigment and oil. And how can we create these illusions of not just the straight depiction of the scene, but something a little richer around it? And for me, a lot of that tends to come down to color. So I'll just pick this one up. So I got permission to take the show down a little bit, to hold this up to show you guys. So this is, I think this was down in Spruce Head. And this is one of the things, I've painted a lot of lobster boats over the years because I really find like the shape of them and the working boats really fun. There's a lot of, actually my kids and I were just talking about it yesterday because we saw this beautiful blue hulled kind of like picnic boat, lobster boat shape driving into a harbor. And they were like, oh my God, you should paint that. I was like, no, it's too pretty. It needs to be, they need to like drag a bunch of traps against the side and scratch it up. And my 9-year-old said, so you only like the ugly pretty boats? I was like, yes, that's exactly what I like, is the ugly pretty boats. But it's because of the charm and character to them. So I'll try to hold this back where there's more light on it. So the thing that when I'm painting these scenes and trying to figure out how to do something different, like I've been trying to figure out since I moved up here and I started painting so much more of the water, this sort of like backlit where there's sun bouncing off the water, there's wind on the water and the sun's behind it, and it's just like this glare glowing into the eye. I still stare at it a little bit. When I first moved up here, I painted way too much looking into this glare, trying to figure out like how does this optical interaction work, where it looks like this water is like on fire, and how can you get that with like the small range of colors we have, the small spectrum of colors we have with pigments. And I've been trying to learn things like how to find within the value shape of this landmass, looking for the temperature differences of like where there's really rich saturated colors like this. When you're looking into this with your eye, it's like you look for 1 second and it's all just like a silhouette of dark boats and bright glare and you can see a little bit of sky and watercolor, but it like burns into your eye a little bit. And it's like, you're basically looking straight into the sun. It's like sun bouncing directly into your eye. Just super not healthy, and I'm trying not to do it as much. But I've been trying to figure out like how can I instead of just using dark and light, or just sometimes it's a warm and cool, like you can just make all this cool in the warm water and then everything's fine. But there's also this sort of like living interaction that feels like happens when you have the warmth of the sun glowing through all this stuff. So I've been trying to figure out how to use these warm greens and this sort of glowing edge along the land where the water meets the land, like how to make that look kind of like fiery, and that there can be a specific color to that, and that like Giacometti sculptures, there are these like long, thin bronze sculptures, and it looks like you're staring at a person who's got the sun behind them, because they're sort of like dissolving, the edges are like dissolving in. And that sometimes happens on the boats, where like the sun kind of like dissolves the boats and shrinks them down a little bit. So I've been trying to figure out how to take all of my experience painting this same landscape and scene, and sometimes use it for that kind of thing. Or like this was up in Schoodic Point, and I remember standing on this beach with a friend and looking across this cove, and the amount of color in these rocks it felt like there was like a little rainbow of just rock colors in this kind of like low tide rock pile. And then thinking about like going home, like, if I paint that from a photo, it's just gray and flat. And there are like little, there's like a simplistic, straightforward way to try to paint that, but I wanted to try to figure out how could I sort of reference that rainbow effect by putting in, like, there are little pink notes in the rocks and orange notes, and there's blues and greens, and then bringing that into the water also, so that the painting is, in some ways, it's about the cove, but it's also about how much color our eye can take in when we look at a scene like this, and this sort of like finding the sort of jewel tones in what is normally like a kind of a grayish scene, and having like finding the richest color experience in not just the backlit, the strong backlit lobster boat kind of light, but this was sort of just like, this was probably 12:30 in the afternoon. It's not like romantic sunset light. It was just boring, standing on the coast of Maine, midday light, but it still had some kind of like, there's a beauty to the rich subtlety of it all. And so I want to have the colors pile up on top of each other in that subtlety. And then another thing that I've been playing around with trying to like make the painting not just about like a straight depiction of the scene, but more about the experience of being there, is sort of setting a color key. So starting every painting with kind of a color idea in mind. So the sunset one that's on that wall of the lobster boat, and then there's a little rowboat in the foreground, that was kind of a pinkish sunset, and this was done in the studio after the fact, but I remember standing there and thinking, oh, this is such a nice soft pink color in the sky, but I don't do subtlety very well, so I was like, well, if it was a little pink, I can make it super pink, and then just
Barbie pink.
Yeah, Barbie pink, exactly, yeah. And so but then if I have an overall pink painting, how can I make this like pinkish glow of twilight just after the sun's gone down, and sort of like washing pink across the horizon on the other side? Like how can I build that up with using some sort of complementary colors, like getting the little teal on the Gladys Wink, which is the lobster boat, or the purple hull. That boat on the left actually does have a purple hull. And this is sort of another part of these paintings to me, is having like a personal connection to a lot of the things, because I have been around here so long. So that purple boat, the Gladys Wink's just a lobster boat that works out of Camden Harbor. The purple boat is called Plum Crazy, and I think it's probably sunk by now. I haven't seen it in a year, but for a couple years it was always in Camden Harbor, and they would collect bait fish. So they would go out with nets and like collect pogies that would sell to lobstermen. And during COVID, my daughters and I got 4 lobster traps. And so to put bait in the beginning. One of my friends told me, until you get bait, just use cans of wet cat food. Just open that and stick it in a bait bag, put it in the trap. And we caught our first lobsters with cans of cat food. Eventually, I started buying pogies from the guys on Plum Crazy, who were just a couple of total cowboys. Like, they were nuts. But it was really fun because despite the fact that they were nuts, they knew us. So they'd see us in our little dinghy, which is what we have a 7-foot dinghy we'd be pulling our lobster traps up with. And we'd be like motoring through the harbor with a little 2.5 horse engine and puttering away, and they'd be blowing by like with nets trying to catch all the fish. And they would come out of their way to make sure we had bait fish. And it was like, it's so fun. Like, so a lot of these paintings have some kind of relationship like that in there. That's kind of a fun. It's on top of trying to find the ways to like create a visual richness to them. There's also, the longer I paint here, I have a much more of a personal connection to all these subjects. And actually the rowboat that's in the foreground of that boat is owned by a guy named Ben, who I'm on the Camden Library Board, hence Camden on Canvas, the library fundraiser, which Nathaniel Meyer participated in last week. And we had this, it was like this whole thing. And so one of the other library board members who helps me do that is dating the guy who owns that rowboat. And I now have his ex-wife's piano in my house. And it's like, I mean, the like circling around of this stuff is like out of control. It's really fun. And that's it's also like standing on the Scudic Peninsula and looking at this view. Like, it's also, I mentioned that I was standing there with a friend. It's so fun to like share these experiences with somebody. So like, I see this and I think like, I remember not just seeing the rich color, but pointing out like, oh my God, how crazy is the amount of color in these rocks? And look at what happens in the water. And there's these like ochre tints. Like, I love when water has purples and greens and browns and weird things in it. But like, to see that with somebody is really fun. And to, you know, for me also, a lot of that is being with my children and being in places like, this is Rockport Harbor where we swim quite a bit. And this is a view of a bakery that's not far from the harbor. We have, there's a woman, Megan, who has a little bakery in Camden that she just sells out of her house. And honestly, her house is the size of this room also. It's this tiny house, but she makes, every Saturday morning, she has a bakery that she opens up for like 2 hours, and people line up an hour before she opens up to get her cinnamon buns and things. It's crazy. So, and she has, speaking of Barbie, a bright pink house. It's great. So of course I love it. And I went over to paint thinking I was going to paint the pink of the house. And on the corner, on the corner of her property, like right at the edge of the driveway, is this little old antique bicycle. And you can kind of see in the bottom, there's a sign that says bakery with an arrow pointing in. And on the hubcap, on the wheel, on the outside of the wheel, there's a cupcake that's some metal cupcake shape. And I don't really feel like, when I'm making the painting, I don't feel like I have to illustrate and make sure everyone knows, like, this is a cupcake and this is a bakery bike. But she also, this mailbox is on the handlebars of the bike. So her mailbox is attached to a bike that has a cupcake on the wheel and a bakery sign sitting up front. And I just love, like, there's so much charm to that. And for about 2 years, I lived across the street from her. So she and the kids, like, she made the kids' birthday cake and we went to pick it up, and her cat like came out and was like almost stepped in the cake. It's like all this fun stuff. And so like, I think for me, you don't need to know that whole story. Like, it can be a story. Like, I think there's a color story here that's there's like a weird pink and green kind of like contrast that happens in that painting that I think is rich enough. But I can look at it and like, I feel like if you look at it long enough, you start noticing things. You start wondering, what is this? And then eventually, maybe I didn't paint it that detailed, so maybe you never know it's a cupcake. But if you figure it out, it's kind of fun to think that someone might puzzle out or create their own kind of narrative around these things. And this view of Rockport Harbor was one I found with my kids, because a couple of years ago they started mowing and cleaning up this sort of like the top of this hill that looks down over the harbor. And when they did that, they put in this chess set that's like each square is probably 1 foot by 1 foot or something. And so the chess pieces are all 3 feet high or so, and you can stand there and play chess. And my kids and I, none of us are good. They are worse than me though. But but we'll sometimes play chess up there. And on a sunny day playing chess up there, we'll look down. And I kept thinking, God, that is such a view going down this charming house is actually just the harbor master's office, and this is the bathroom right there. But like it's a it's purely just a functional building. But this is the beach we swim on, and there's the schooners sail out on this side, and I know the guy who owns that lobster boat. Like it's fun to have these places that the kids and I find together, and then to like sort of document and paint all the stories around that. Like even this past weekend, last night, I sailed with the kids because they want to skip summer camp this week, and so we let them. And then I was able to skip out and work for 2 days. So we sailed out to Pulpit Harbor in North Haven, and we're running around and these finding scenes like the one behind Nathaniel or the one over there, like these just like coastal island scenes, and it's so fun to have them as part of the process. For me, summer used to be entirely before kids. It was just get the easel, go outside, and paint like basically 12-hour days any day the sun was shining. And now it's a little more like of a balance. Like if they actually go to camp, then yes, do that. But when they skip camp, then what can we do together, and how can I kind of enrich my paintings through that? And then the other part of this is the still lifes, which is unfortunately behind you all. But this round piece up here, I've been doing a lot of these sort of tabletop still lives that are kind of the still life version of these personal stories. There are a couple things. In some ways, they're like very decorative paintings. They're all about sort of the tablecloth and the pattern. That's sort of the starting point, and then that sort of sets a color scheme. Like we talk about, sometimes I want a very cool bluish one. Sometimes I want something that's like hot red like this, or sometimes there's we have a cat, and the kids love cats. So there are usually some kind of cat thing in most of the paintings. And one of the fabrics I just got in the spring was this huge cat print on it, and the kids love that because it looks like there are cats in the painting, which I have not gotten the cat to pose yet, but I'm trying. But I love the challenge of going from these really deep landscapes where there's a deep space and trying to paint in sort of that atmospheric depth to the still lifes, where sometimes only have like 6 inches of depth because I just set it up on a tabletop and stand right next to it, and everything is just, it's an aerial view looking down this very shallow space, and it's sort of just about how trying to organize the chaos of our lives. So pretty much everything in there is either it's something from a friend or something the kids and I have done, or one of my hobbies. Like that one, that there's like a crown on the top of that one, looks like it's like cut out of paper. That was from a friend's kid who was graduating from preschool. And then there's some books. I think it's The Wind in the Willows is the blue book on the right. And the New Yorker tote bag is in there, along with some, a friend of mine, Jessica Ives, who's a painter. Her mom had a shop in Camden that just closed recently, Joellen Designs, and she sold the central 2 dishes, the bowl and the sort of plate, were things she was selling in her shop, which I've always loved the pattern on these things. And unfortunately, her closing the shop was an excuse for me to finally buy all the things I wanted. But I love having the suggestion of that. And there's a lot of note writing, and the scissors, which the little kids sort of safety scissors, which reminds me of being a kid and also all the time I spend with the kids.
What about the bell?
The bell is from my daughter, Audrey, who's 11. Last year, I think it was not this past winter, but the one before, she didn't want to go to school one morning, and she's grumbling, whatever, my tummy hurts. It's like, whatever, you're fine, go to school. Get ready for school. Because it's usually they need to go sit on the toilet for a little while. And so I was like, you'll be fine, whatever, get out of here. And so she's getting ready for school, and she's getting more, I can see she actually is really visibly uncomfortable. So I end up taking her to the doctor, and it was her appendix, which she had taken out. Yeah. So thankfully I didn't send her to school. I do listen eventually. It takes me a minute, but I get there. And so when we got home from the appendix, which is, obviously traumatic, I spend the whole time trying to keep her up, everything's gonna be fine, surgery's no big deal, everybody does it. And then we get home and I break down, she goes to bed and I'm bawling, and everything's, we wake up the next day and she wants to get my attention, but she can't yell because it it used her diaphragm. So she has a cup of water and I don't know if it was like a marker or a spoon or something. She's like banging it on a glass on the mason jar to get my attention. And so I was like, this isn't going to work. You need a bell to get me. So I went down to the antique store in Camden and found a little handbell. And she felt so guilty using it which is amazing. I would have loved it. But she's like, it feels like you're my servant. I was like, I am. Like, for a week, I am. So that bell actually was like it was really hard, but it was a really, like, we bonded a lot through that time. Yeah. So before I open it up, let me just see if I wrote anything else here. Yeah, so is the buoy tree in here? I don't remember where anything is. Oh, it's over on here. Here, I'll just pick it up. Okay. So this is just another one of the, for the sort of, serves two purposes for me. One was, this was early spring this year before everything, this is an apple tree that hadn't fully leafed out yet, so there's a lot of sun coming in. But I love even though like early spring is really grays and browns, so this is grays and browns, but I'm also trying to get as much color in here as possible and really loving like the richness that like a gray trunk of an apple tree can have purple and green and ochre and like this sort of grayish color. You can have like a whole spectrum inside these, or the grass has barely started coming in, but there's still like a lot of rich color, even though it's kind of a dull, lifeless time of year. Like there's not a whole lot going on yet. And then these buoys are these ones we found on adventures, and actually that one too, where we just go to an island and just try to, we'd just be running around on the beach and picking up buoys and whatever other trash. And then these two guys are buoys that we used for our lobster traps, where we were going out and putting the chicken cans, the cans of cat food in the traps. But those were also found. We just found blue buoys. The way we picked our colors was, what buoys have we found the most of, and how can we turn that? So we found enough blue buoys that we could like finish painting in blue and then put the white stripe around them. So this is like sort of another mix of trying to figure out how to make the paint be more than just a painting of the scene itself, but like tell a story narratively and through color. And part of learning how to do this is I'm trying to figure out a balance of like using, I've learned a lot as a plein air painter. I've learned a lot about Maine being on location, like standing outside painting all day. People come up and talk to you about anything. So I learned more about sailboats before I knew how to sail, just from sailors coming up and wanting to tell me all about their boats, and like lobstermen and just people being on vacation. It's a very interactive way of painting. And then I also just like observing nature. Like I spent a lot of time just staring at things and trying to figure out like the difference between taking a photo of something and painting it and staring with your naked eye. Your eye sees so much subtle color difference. Like even on these walls, like there's this, I shouldn't call Greenhut out on this, but this light looks a little bluer than this one. And maybe it's just that it's got a different angle, but like I see a little more yellow here than over there. And so there's very, very small color shifts that you can see that in a photograph wouldn't show up so much. So you memorize, like you can learn a lot of these things and take them and like put them in your paintings. But I also want to make the paintings like instinctual, where I'm trying to paint more by like just trusting that if I see a weird teal in the trunk of an apple tree, that I should just paint it in there and not think that doesn't belong there. So learning to like kind of trust my eye and trust myself with these things. And I think that's probably about it. So does anyone have any questions?
I was waiting until you were
Thank you for the punctuation.
Do your daughters paint?
Yeah, a little bit. They go through phases of painting a lot. I try to have supplies available for them. When they were little, they would come just hang out in my studio, and I had 2 old paintings that didn't work out, and so they'd each have a painting they could work on. And one of them, it's probably almost as big as this. I think Audrey was 4 when she was doing it. She was probably like 4 or 5, maybe even into 6. And she'd come in and paint for 20 minutes, and she ended up painting 2 big chickens, because we got chickens around then. And then there's multiple rainbows, and there's a swimming pool that's just like a square of blue with green dots around it. It's the craziest painting in the world, but it's really cool. But they don't take it super seriously yet, which is fine. They're 9 and 11, they don't have to. Yeah. Yes?
My name is Audrey.
Oh, great name, wonderful name.
Yes, but have you painted your daughters?
Oh, a ton, yes. Yeah, I've done, I probably do 4 or 5 paintings of the kids each year. And that's like part of like going on the island adventures. I take tons of photos of them. And then in the winter is usually when I do kind of bigger paintings of the kids. Yeah.
That's so obvious you love that.
Oh, that's nice, thanks. Oh, actually another thing, talking about color key, like setting the tone for this painting being bright pink here. When I, like with all the paintings, I do start with some thought in mind of like, I want to saturate the colors, I want to start with like a certain color idea. And Dean's show in the side gallery is a great example of that, because he's like, it's like color key on steroids. And it's really fun to see, like there's like a bright phthalo blue-green painting, and then like a purpley one, then a brownish one. So that's when you get up, that's well worth checking out. Yeah. Yes?
This is fascinating to hear. Have you thought of giving a recording with each painting so that people would know about that? I think that would add something.
I haven't, mostly because I just don't have the time. But I do. I like the idea that what I do more is on Instagram, when I put a post up, I try to write a little bit of the story about it there, both with like some of the painterly reasons why I'm doing things and some of that background information. Because I just feel like it's, like you said, it adds a lot to it, and I want people to stop, spend a little more time with it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, when your main oeuvre seems to be the observed landscape thing, but when we look at your still lives, they seem to be incredibly set up, like painfully set up in a way that I think is incredibly satisfying. Is that something that you find to be really edifying, since you are relying so much on the vagaries of nature, and then all of a sudden you have a thing that you can manipulate yourself?
That's actually, that was a huge challenge. So I've been, the still lives, like I sort of do them, I started painting still lives kind of with this like aerial view probably 12 or 15 years ago. I did a couple, and then I didn't
circular?
do, no, they were square or rectangle, but like they've kind of like come and gone a little bit. And then I stopped doing it for a little while, and then I started doing it again. And I don't know when it was, maybe 10 years ago, I started doing these lobster table kind of scenes. Yep. And every time I do them, I'm now kind of used to it a little bit, but you put the tablecloth out, and I'm like, okay, just put some stuff out. And I realized like that arranging the still life takes just as long as painting it sometimes. And it's a lot of, like when I'm doing these, I have this table in my studio usually, mostly because the kids get so mad when I take over our dining table. It's like, I don't know, they insist we eat dinner at the dining table, and it drives them nuts if I have like a whole thing they're not allowed to touch for like a week and a half. So I like start setting it up, and a lot of times I will just start like piling objects on there, trying to figure out like, is there a theme? Like I've done some that have like some mackerel in them, so I'll know the mackerel are going to go there, and I'll like start setting out thinking, okay, this might be slightly seafoodish related, and the next thing you know, there's like cat dishes and like novels and knitting, but it's the idea of them is they're kind of like how my table gets left sometimes when the kids and I have been crafting and eating and playing, so it's really hard to make that look good. Yeah. Like when you're sitting at the table, you're like, oh, this would make a great still life. And then you try to arrange it in the studio, it's impossible. Okay. So I try, like in that, you'll sort of notice there's like a top heavy, like there's whites that kind of like the white note card on the left bleeds into the white paper with the scissors on, which bleeds into the white Gamblin paint tubes, to the white sort of like napkin-y thing. I think it was actually a pillowcase, the like cloth that has the blue pattern on it, into the bowls. So I try to have like darks and lights, or like different colors. Like it's like trying to have them tie together even though it's chaos. Right. And then I actually start I usually spend 2 or 3 days just moving things around, and something will come in, something will go out, and then eventually I start painting it. And once I start painting, I'll be standing there painting it and thinking, I want that coffee cup over there, and then I have to like redraw the stuff around it. So sometimes like with these, the drawing might take 20 minutes of just like sketching in where are the major shapes, how do I arrange it, and then I start playing with color. And with those, sometimes it's like a whole day of just drawing stupid shapes on the canvas.
Yeah.
And like, it's so, and then like I have to draw in all the pattern of the tablecloth. It takes forever.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain cleverness there, especially with the circular canvas and then the circular dishes that are kind of a little off, but they move in. I mean, it seems like you're kind of reveling in that design that maybe you don't get to do.
Well, I get to put everything where I want it.
Yeah.
The trees are never where you want them. They're like, so like this, but there's also like that godlike power of like putting anything where you want it. It's like kind of too much sometimes. But I do think one of the reasons I thought a circular canvas was fun for these is the looking down on the tabletop. It's a little disorienting when it's on the wall. So like it feels like having no horizon line in the painting. Like when you hang it, you kind of just like guess this looks like up-ish. Yeah, it's like top-ish. There's no like clear, I don't even think I've marked like, hey guys, this is where I want the top to be. Because it doesn't actually matter that much as long as it's about right. And it does feel like you just kind of keep spinning around. And then the other thing that those of you who do a lot of drawing might notice is sometimes I will prop, like the blueberry cup that's on the top right quadrant is tilted up a little bit. Whereas the yellowy orange mug on the left is more, you're looking down in it. So I am standing next to it painting. So whatever's right next to my leg is straight down. And then as you go further away, there tends to be a little more perspective tipped in, like the circles turn into ellipses. And then sometimes, just to make it a little more confusing, I'll take a cup and like prop something underneath of it. So it's like kicked off to the side or a little weird. Just to make the space a little more kind of like swirling. Yeah.
Have you played with other media?
Yeah, I'm.
Models from the beginning?
I've done in like college and high school. We tried a lot of different things, and I'm getting like I find my watercolors acceptable now. But it took me like 20 years or so. It's really hard when I hardly even draw with a pencil anymore. Generally, I just like all these paintings I sketch out the composition on the canvas with a brush with burnt sienna, and then just start painting into it. So when you switching from that to watercolor was really, really hard. But I am, like when I'm sailing with the kids, it's hard to get a pass for like 2 hours or 3 hours of like standing there doing like a little painting in oil. But I can get a half hour to do a watercolor, and it fits in a backpack. And so I am working really hard on doing those. And the last like 2 or 3 years I've started framing them, and like I do like them. But it's hard, it's a totally different mindset. Yeah.
Do you find that you paint on different color canvas and draw on top of, or do you usually work from the white canvas?
So usually you can see in some of them there's like a underpainting. Most often if I'm outside I used to use burnt sienna as a wash, and then I wipe it off so that the canvas is dry but it's like toned. It's sort of like a light burnt sienna. I'm trying to see if there's anything that was, sometimes I'll use a pink. This one was phthalo blue underneath. I remember doing that. I can't tell. Was this one burnt? That one's burnt sienna too. Yeah, I'm trying to see. Once in a while I'll use like quinacridone red. Oh, and that's one of the rare ones that was on a white canvas, the lobster boats there. Yeah, I can't tell right now. Oh, and the one of the Angelique, the greenish schooner that's on the back wall there. Yeah, that one had alizarin yellow, which is like a Indian yellow kind of color. It's like a really vibrant, punchy yellow. But sometimes it's just like if it's kind of like that was an overcast day, and it felt like having that really bright yellowish underneath would kind of unify things and create kind of a fun warmth to a gray day. And sometimes, like with this one that has the phthalo in it, it was like it was early morning, and I felt like sometimes burnt sienna is sort of like the safe choice, and I'm just like reliable. But once in a while, if it's like kind of a weird light, I'll play around with something else. But I find the white canvas really hard. It's nice just to like get some mess on it first. Yeah.
The balance between plein air and photography and just memory.
It used to be pretty much entirely plein air. up until maybe 10 years ago or so. And including like larger pieces, like everything was done outside. I did like a 3x6, I had a couple 3x6 foot paintings outside that were, it was a lot. And then sometimes I'd work on them in the studio and touch them up a little, but a lot of it was outside. And now it's probably more than 50% in the studio, but it's more seasonal. Like this time of year, I don't want to be inside at all. And then, so a lot of the year I'm doing the still lives, the figure paintings, and larger landscapes in the studio. But I am finding it harder and harder. Like, despite the fact that I've like identified as a plein air painter for most of my career, sometimes I go out and think, I really don't know what I'm doing anymore. Like, I forgot how to do this part of things. Like, I want the comfort of the studio where I can like get exactly how I want it.
So I'm curious, with your pink sunset, how do you manage that?
That was from a photo in the studio. So when I am working on something that's like a color-based painting in the studio, I'm really thinking about color key. Yeah, like and like, you know, the paintings of my kids, I've had my daughter Hazel posed once when she was exhausted from summer camp and was willing to sit on the porch for maybe 20 minutes. It was brutal. It's like she kept that painting because she said, it's the only one you've ever done that actually looks like me, which is a super rude thing to say. But I still let her keep it. But most of the paintings I do with the kids are them in action. So it's them like climbing a rock or like sitting in a pine tree or doing these things that I really just want to get a quick photo and then spend some time with it. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, Nathaniel.
Well, just out of curiosity, when you did your pink one,
Yes.
which really, I mean, it pops like crazy. Was that dory? Did it really have that vermilion stripe?
It did.
Huh.
So-
well, just because that ties it to
Well-
a thing that makes it not seem like everything's just washed pink. Like that's the angle.
Yeah. Well, to get color nerdy with it, I think most of the painting is like a phthalo, like the turquoise phthalo of the top of the lobster boat through to a pinkish kind of like the pink warmy color. Except for the sky has that yellow tint in it, which is kind of like out of place a little bit. And then that vermilion, that like cadmium red stripe, I think the cadmium red stripe is what makes the painting because it's a little like off-putting and it's really fun to have something in a painting that's a little like awkward and like ideally, so it's like, I don't even know how, like, I don't know what the analogy is, but I want it to be like awkward in the way that like you don't necessarily notice it's awkward. Like I want it to be awkward, like it's something feels off, but you don't know what it is. So you know it's a vermilion stripe, but hopefully most people just think like, oh, this is like there's like some kind of like electric charge to the painting.
Well,
And
that with the purples is like crazy.
it's a weird choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it's
Yeah.
not that. It's tasty.
Yeah. So like that kind of awkward thing is also like these teal stripes down here. Like I love finding like color surprises. And part of that's like I'm referencing the bottom of the dock with this teal stripe or making this boat come forward by putting this really strong phthalo in here. And then trying to find color vibrations, which is another one of the color ideas to sort of like add energy to a painting, which is basically when two colors are the same value but opposite temperatures. So like you have a bright orange shirt with a blue shirt over top of it. If that is like those are very contrasting colors, and if they were the same level of darkness, they would really like kind of agitate and drive each other crazy. So I try to do like smaller versions of that in here. So having like this teal, it's a little bit darker than that purple, but having colors like that near each other, or like this buoy next to the sky, there's this slight like agitation kind of throughout the whole thing, and that is similar to this orangey stripe in the painting. They're quirky in a way that like kind of create a active energy in the canvas, and like it's kind of like when you look at something when you see things in real life, there usually is a richness of experience, and I'm trying to saturate and exaggerate some of those feelings in the paintings, so that I can, instead of just doing a straightforward copy of what I see, I'm trying to copy the experience of being there.
How
Yeah.
about the lobster boats there?
Well, so those are painted on a friend's peninsula, and I mean in terms of color vibration, these when lobstermen are kind enough to have bright orange buoys on a blue day, that wins me over alone. And then color-wise, I love the, so generally I want to have as much color temperature difference in my paintings as possible, because that create, like the painting, the big round one has really cold blues and really hot reds, and that has teal, orange, purple, like really big punches. And I basically was thinking of this in pair with the one I was holding up earlier. I'm going to bring it over for a second. Partly because I have painted lobster boats in Maine for in a lot of different lights and conditions, but having these canvases the same size and having one where it's backlit and one where it's front lit, and sort of seeing like, or maybe over here is better. There, that's probably a little better. So trying to see the difference between, like, when something's backlit, it's all contrast. Within that contrast, I can put as much temperature difference as possible. But then when it's front lit, or it's kind of more side lit, but still it's like a softer, like a midday kind of soft light. I wanted to kind of like, I wanted to try to create a sunny day painting in mostly a cool palette. So if can I do a painting that looks like a sunny, bright day that's dominant blues and the whites only warm up a little bit? So it's sort of like, instead of having the whole spectrum of like, reds, oranges, yellows, all the way, like sort of like tightening in and just using like a little bit of that spectrum from like blue to like slightly yellowish white. So these do have warm notes in here. Usually this granite, it is kind of like a lighter granite down in this area, Spruce Head, but there's a lot more ochre kind of tones in there. But I thought it'd be a lot more fun to tie together the lobster boat, the whites of the lobster boat with the white of the rocks, and try to find ways for, like lost edges or fun way to create more kind of abstract interest in a painting. So having the edge of a boat blend into the edge of another boat, the stern of this boat kind of falls into the bow of this boat, and then whatever this nonsense, I think there's another lobster boat tucked behind it. Like it doesn't always matter exactly what you're seeing, as long as you're referencing the colors you see. Your eye can kind of like, or your brain can organize the information your eye gives you. And I'm trying not to do the organizing for you. So ideally, I am just putting spots of color down, like equivalent to like pixelating an image, right? So like if you look at a digital image close enough, it's just dots of color. Painting is basically that, but the dots are a little more abstract looking. They're like different shapes and sizes and thicknesses. But I thought it was really fun to try to do, like even these greens, if you look at the green here, and this was another early spring painting, but that like really rich ochre brownish kind of green compared to this, if you put those next to each other, this would look like blue-gray if it was not in the context of all of this painting. But in the context of all these blues, that reads as sunlit green. And so it was kind of like the pink. I was like, okay, this is a blue painting. So if I'm in a blue painting, what can I do to put sunlight into it? Yes?
Do you worry about composition? It's almost like that line is right in the middle of your painting.
This, like the horizon line?
Yeah, because of the white boats pulling you across with the rocks.
Yeah. So like, do I worry about like splitting the canvas 50-50 like that?
Yeah, are you concerned with thirds
So technically, you're not supposed to put a horizon line in the middle of the painting. I find that an interesting challenge. Like I kind of feel like, oh yeah? So like, I don't know if I've done, I mean, this one's not quite there, but this is basically divided 50, like blue sky to land. I don't know how often, that one's close to 50-50 on the top. And so is the one above Nathaniel, the rocky one. And actually, this guy is similar. This one, I was more interested in what was going on in the sky, so I dropped it. But I think it's kind of fun to figure out how can I divide, if I divide the canvas in half, can I still make it an interesting composition? And I think the way the boats kind of meander along is kind of, it is kind of fun. Also, this helps a lot. That does me a lot of favors. And also, like there's the same way, like I talk about seeing all the color in like the tree trunk and the apple tree. There's ochres and pinks and teals. There's a lot of like color shift in the sky, and even more of it in the water. So if the painting is basically about with this like play of blue, then I think it's kind of like I can get away with it because it's kind of about like how do these blues work off of each other and how are they made richer by this stripe of warm whites that goes through. Yeah. Cool, thanks. Anything else? Well, thanks so much for coming out. I really appreciate you guys being here.